In part 1 of this video, we introduced the typical structure of a study-based response. Let's compare this to the typical structure of an argument-based response. Suppose your question is, to what extent is one cognitive process reliable? You start with a definition. Reliability of memory means its ability to store information securely and retrieve it exactly as it was encoded. Reliability of memory was brought into question when it was discovered that in a typical eyewitness situation, memory of an event may change in response to small variations in the leading question. For example, Loftus and Palmer, 1974, conducted a study where they showed that the emotional intensity of the verb in the leading question changes speed estimates provided by participants. Relevant details of the study follow here. On the basis of that, researchers formulated the theory of reconstructive memory. Details of the theory follow. However, there existed two possible interpretations of the findings from Loftus and Palmer, 1974. One interpretation is that there is a genuine memory change and that the leading question interferes with the information about the event stored in long-term memory and changes it. Another interpretation is that we're dealing with response bias. Memory itself does not change, but when participants are unsure about the speed of the car, the leading question may bias their response in a certain direction. To rule out the second interpretation, which goes contrary to the theory of reconstructive memory, Loftus and Palmer, 1974, conducted another experiment where participants were asked the question, "Did you see any broken glass in the video?" when in fact there was no broken glass. They observed that participants who had a more intense verb in their leading question, such as smashed into, were more likely a week later to report seeing broken glass in the video. This suggested that genuine memory change did in fact occur, ruled out the second interpretation, and supported the theory of reconstructive memory. However, certain doubts were raised regarding the validity of these findings. First, speed estimates are fuzzy and uncertain. It may be easy to distort them with leading questions, but can information that is more concrete and factual also get distorted? Second, in the study of Loftus and Palmer, the leading question was verbal and the participants' report was also verbal. So verbal information may affect verbal responses, but can verbal information affect non-verbal memory, for example, visual? Third, Loftus and Palmer tested memory of an event using the process of recall, but in many real-life eyewitness situations it is recognition that is required. Among a set of stimuli, recognize the one that you have seen before. To clear these doubts, Loftus, Miller and Burns, 1978, conducted a study where misleading information was used instead of leading questions, misleading information was verbal, but the memory of the event was visual. Memory was tested in a recognition task rather than a recall task. In this study, and details of the research study follow here. The study demonstrated that verbal misleading information may indeed get integrated with visual memory of an event and alter this memory, as measured in visual recognition tasks. This lends support to the theory of reconstructive memory, showing that the theory is applicable across a range of situations. However, the theory was further criticized on the basis of its applicability to real-life situations. All the experiments mentioned so far were carried out in artificial laboratory conditions. The influence of leading questions and eyewitness testimony in a real-life situation was investigated by Yeel and Cutshall, 1986. Details of the study follow here. They found no effect of leading questions and recall of the details of the robbery. This means one of two things. Either the theory of reconstructive memory is only applicable to artificial experimental conditions, or the study of Yeel and Cutshall tapped into a separate memory phenomenon, perhaps flashbulb memory. Unlike the previous studies, we may assume that participants in the study of Yeel and Cutshall experienced a strong emotional arousal when they witnessed the event. It is possible that this emotional arousal activated the mechanism of flashbulb memory, which obscured the action of reconstructive memory. In conclusion, eyewitness testimony research has demonstrated that post-event information in the form of leading questions or misleading information can be integrated with the memory of the event, both verbal and visual, and alter this memory, as seen both in recall and recognition tasks. However, there are still questions regarding the applicability of reconstructive memory to real-life situations. When emotional arousal is present, it may be hard to separate the actions of reconstructive memory from that of flashbulb memory, which complicates research in this area. This response follows the argument-based approach. Note the following. 1. Different research studies are used to support different arguments. Two different studies are never used to support one and the same argument. 2. The study of Loftus and Palmer, 1974, consists of two parts, two separate experiments. In a study-based approach, both parts are presented as aspects of the same study, whereas in the argument-based approach, they can be safely used as two different research studies, as they clearly support two different arguments. 3. The arguments are arranged in a flow. First, the theory of reconstructive memory and the supporting study, then two possible interpretations and a supporting study to select one of them, then the argument that reconstructive memory works with recognition as well as recall and a supporting study, then the criticism of ecological validity and a supporting study. 4. Such story-like arrangement of arguments means that critical thinking points are embedded in the argumentation flow itself. In a study-based approach, critical thinking points are mainly gained from evaluation of individual studies, but here, evaluation is an indispensable part of the overall discussion. 5. Evaluation points are related to the question itself, the concept of reconstructive memory, rather than individual research studies. And 6. Students do not have to describe all details of a research study, only those that are relevant in the context of the given argumentation flow, the ones that are used to support the argument. When students study topics using the argument-based approach, they understand the concepts and the big ideas. Individual research studies, names and procedural details, are only important to support these big ideas. A good mental exercise to see if your response follows the argument-based approach is this. Take the essay and delete all the details of all the research studies, as well as evaluation of these individual research studies. Look at what's left. If the leftover is a well-developed argumentative answer to the question, you're dealing with an argument-based response. If the leftover is an introduction, a conclusion, and one simple idea in between, this is a study-based response. When students use the argument-based approach, they can score the highest marks even if they forget all names, dates, and many details of research studies. Using the argument-based approach is like seeing the forest behind the trees. Since exam questions are always questions about the forest, it would be nice to give detailed descriptions of several individual trees, but that is not quite what is required. Using trees only as an example of what's going on in the forest, and using trees from different parts of the forest to demonstrate how the forest is designed are the keys to success in an argument-based approach. The Oxford